Good afternoon, I'm your host, Brian Buckmire, here at the Law&Crime Trial Network. We are still covering the Nachtman case where the prosecutor is giving the rebuttal closing. Let's take a listen. So there you have the prosecutor sitting down after the rebuttal closing. So that's pretty much it. It doesn't seem like there's going to be much more, obviously no more testimony, and the closing arguments will be done. The jury will be sent to deliberate on the case. I am joined here with Katie Smith. How are you doing today?
Okay, good. How are you?
Good to have you here. So as we've kind of come to the closing of this case. All the evidence has been presented, all the arguments been made, a rebuttal has been given. What's next for this case?
Well, I imagine the judge is going to charge the jury, and then the jury is going to have to deliberate. They're going to have to take the really tough decision in weighing out all the evidence. In particular, they're going to be focused on whether this battered child syndrome is any valid defense to what the defendant did.
Yeah. So in this case, we saw, I think it boiled down to what we see a lot of times here at the Law&Crime Trial Network, a battle of experts, where she, through her defense attorney, is trying to say that, hey, there's an insanity defense here. And as you said, the battered child syndrome plays some part into that. We've heard psychiatrists and doctors and rebuttal doctors and psychiatrists come back and forth. And as we understand it, with the insanity defense, the defense has to prove that she has some sort of mental health defect or disorder, and the prosecution has to rebut that. From what you've seen so far, how do you think that the jury will evaluate maybe some of the expert testimony and coming to that conclusion?
Well, it's so tough with experts because I think juries and lay people know, as well as us in the legal industry know, that experts can be bought. Every side always has an expert to support their side, right? And so at the end of the day, I really think the jury is going to have to look at the common sense here. Did this defendant understand and appreciate her actions, and did she know what she was doing was wrong?
Yeah, and it was interesting, we were watching it yesterday when the prosecution put on their rebuttal expert, and one of our guests had a great comment that sometimes people go to different doctors, for example. They have a trick knee and they go to one doctor and they don't appreciate their opinion, so they go to another. Here, the prosecution brought forward two different doctors. The defense brings in multiple doctors. Is maybe too many doctors or too many psychiatrists too much at some point?
I think there is a point of diminishing returns with experts, as with any type of evidence. And the jury wants their time is valuable. They want to feel like their time is valuable. And at a point, there's almost some oversaturation. My thought always with these cases, you need to make it simple so that when the jury deliberates and sits back and thinks, well, what's the common sense tale here? That's what they really need to do.
And the interesting thing, I like the fact that you bring about the concept of common sense tales, because it appears that both sides have some, I don't want to say craziness, but some ludicrous aspects to them. One that's saying, I guess it could be ludicrous in a sense that she drove all of these miles, allegedly killed her stepfather, set this trap, and then allegedly killed her mother. That seems a little out there. But then the prosecution is also, the prosecution is also going forward by saying, well, this is because she was so afraid of her grades and that their mother would get mad at her. I mean, we've all come home, or maybe, I don't know, I've come home with a grade that my mom probably wouldn't be as happy with, but I didn't plan a murder. Like, that seems ludicrous.
It doesn't, but that's the thing. A lot of these crimes that we see on their face are just crazy, right? I mean, there's murders, and the motives behind them often don't make sense because the person who is committing them isn't really doing it from a rational state of mind. But irrationality does not mean criminal insanity. It doesn't mean that they should be exculpated from their acts, right? It's whether or not they really appreciated what they were doing was wrong, and they proceeded with that anyway.
Yeah. I guess it'd be curious to see if the defense will be able to say, hey, this was so bizarre to a level that it's not just irrational, it's not just out there or quote unquote crazy, that it is actually diminished capacity, it is actually insanity. It'll be interesting to see how the jury wrestles with that.
I agree. I think that the testimony about delusions is very important, because really when you get into that realm of delusions, of not appreciating reality, of schizophrenia, when you get into that zone, I personally think that makes it a lot easier for the jury to grab a hold of that if they really do want to find a defense verdict.
Okay. Let's go back in time just a little and look at some of the prosecution's closing arguments to give us a little bit more meat and potatoes as to what the jury will be deciding on. So there you have the prosecution laying out the evidence as they perceived it, and hopefully walking them being the jury, through the different steps that they would have to get to the conclusion that the prosecution wanted them to get to. Now, it's a lot of information, Katie. I mean, we're going back and forth. The prosecution goes, the defense goes, the prosecution goes. I mean, I know when we watch these trials here that we're always like, oh, it's 10 hours deliberation, 12 hours deliberation, but this could be a deliberation that can go on for days.
Absolutely. On the flip side of that, you can also have jurors that really, really have strong feelings and have made up their mind pretty quickly. But I think that juries do tend to take their job very seriously, and they make pains to go through all the evidence and really carefully consider. Try to be open-minded at least, and not go in there with a closed mind.
Yeah. And I know that you've done trials before. We've all done trials before, at least here at the network. The jury's not supposed to consider the punishment, but they always do. And I would imagine that when someone is facing life without parole, that is something that they're deeply considering while they're thinking of the charges.
Absolutely, especially even if they find the defendant is liable, but they feel some sympathy for her because of all they've heard about her past and about her issues, that really weighs heavily in the back of their minds. You know, juries consider what they will as human beings, even though they're not supposed to.
Yeah. And we're going to see what happens. Like we said, the jury is going to be charged, meaning giving jury instructions, and then probably deliberate sometime in the next hour. But we're going to continue with coverage of this case and past cases of the week after this break.